Hi, everyone. My name is Elaine James. I'm Associate Professor of Old Testament here at Princeton Theological Seminary. The lecture that you're about to hear is from our Orientation to Old Testament Studies class. And this is a class that is a survey of the Old Testament and considers the history and nature of these texts and how they relate to both the history of ancient Israel and Judah, but also their history of interpretation and ongoing significance for communities of faith. So this lecture on Amos and Hosea comes from week 9, where we talk about prophecy, and I hope you enjoy it. I'm looking forward to perhaps having the chance to connect with some of you before too long. Thanks a lot. Hello, everyone. It's Dr. James here. I'm going to be talking today about prophets, specifically the 8th century prophets Amos and Hosea. First, I want to just give a little perspective on where we have been and where we are going. So far in this class, we've discussed foundational narratives, the stories of where the world and Israel came from, who the ancestors were, and who their God is. These are stories of covenant, betrayal, law and grace, faithfulness, as well as violence. It turns out that on close examination, these narratives of the Old Testament give us profound promises and a celebrated history, but this is also a history that is profoundly human. It is shaped as much by fear, exploitation, and catastrophe as it is by faith and hope. The biblical writers, in other words, are realists. They offer us a sober accounting of our shared humanity. They ask us to reflect on our heritage, on the state of the world as we find it, and on our own deeply mixed humanity. We see ourselves as in a mirror, perhaps, full of promise and faith and hope, and also full of catastrophe, mistakes, and brokenness. To read the Old Testament is to confront ourselves and our history, which can be an uncomfortable experience. But these texts do not leave us without hope. While the historical narratives end with seeming disaster, Israel in exile in Babylon, there are the promises of the covenant, the knowledge that God, who was faithful to the ancestors, will continue to show faith to new generations. Here, in this lecture, I want to look at another slice of texts from before the exile. So again, 8th century BCE. Here, once again, the accent falls not on hope, but on judgment. So what are the prophets? We tend to think about prophets as predictors of the end of the world. Their province is the future, and these ancient poems should be read, therefore, as offering predictions hundreds or even thousands of years in advance. This is kind of a caricature of prophecy. Here we see Doomsday Redux. Prophet says world will end Friday. Let's hope it doesn't. But at any rate, my point here is simply to say this is not really what the biblical prophets are doing. We've met some prophets already in this class, and if you think about the work that they're up to, it's clear that this is not the case. You'll remember from the Deuteronomistic history that prophets consistently accompany kings. Many of them are insiders to the kingly court and serve as advisors and checks and balances on royal prerogative and power. A key text here is 2 Samuel 12, 7 through 14. Nathan said to David, "You are the man. Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, I anointed you king over Israel. Why have you despised the word of the Lord to do what is evil in his sight? You have struck down Uriah the Hittite with your sword, and have taken his wife to be your wife, and have killed him with the sword of the Ammonites. Now, therefore, the sword will never depart from your house." So this is a model of checks and balances. The king is supposed to mediate God's blessings to the people, and through the upholding of social justice and the right worship of God. Remember, for the Deuteronomists, these two things are always intertwined, as we'll see this is true in the prophets too, social justice and right worship. Here's another image of the prophet Nathan prophesying to David. So what happens, though, in an institution of unchecked power? What happens when a ruler ignores or rejects the branches of power that are supposed to hold them accountable? If only this were only an ancient problem. The prophetic institution helps to subject the king to critique. It's not a popular vocation, and you can imagine why prophets tend to resist the call. So you can remember Moses, who offers his spectacular litany of resistances to the prophetic call, as a good example of that. So the concerns of the prophet are normally what is on their immediate historical horizon. In the case of Nathan, it's David's behavior, and the consequences are also immediate, though sometimes long-lasting. So it's of utmost concern when reading the prophetic materials always to ask yourself, what is the historical context? There's an exegetical imperative to be as careful as possible of thinking first about what the prophet is saying in their own time. So again, what is a prophet? A basic definition, I would commit it to memory. It's not so hard. A prophet is a messenger who mediates between the divine and human worlds. So within the context of God's rule over Israel and the other nations, remember the biblical texts tend to imagine God as king. The prophet acts as a messenger from the divine government to the people governed. There are three dimensions of this. First, the prophet represents the divine king to the human king and community. Second, the prophet proclaims divine justice and the requirements of covenant. And third, the prophet announces and interprets divine interventions. Okay? A prophet is a messenger who mediates between the divine and human worlds. Now, remember too what I just said a moment ago for the Deuteronomists, the intertwined concerns of social justice and right worship. These we're about to see also in our prophetic texts. Before we jump to Amos, I want to just remind you from the lecture on biblical poetry and the Song of Songs, a couple key things to bear in mind when reading biblical poetry. First of all, prophets are poets in almost every case, at least in terms of the writing prophecies that we have, the written prophecies that we have. So it behooves us to keep in mind some tips about reading biblical poetry. The first is, this is just from my other lecture. Go back and watch it. It's very good. But here are the things I want you to pay attention to. First, slow down. Always slow down when you're reading poetry. Poetry asks us to inhabit time in a different way. Okay? Slow down. Don't expect to be able to rush through it. Second, it's not narrative. There's not a story to follow in biblical poetry. It's usually also non-linear, so expect to jump back and forth in time. Expect that things aren't going to unfold in a direct kind of way. Third, notice the privileging of images, particularly in the prophetic poetry. And finally, biblical poetry tends to be a realm that is infected with emotion, and infected, I say, not in a negative way. But just notice that we're in the realm of human psychology, of the inner person, and also the poetry very much asks us to be attentive and present to emotional experience. Okay? So, take a look here at Amos 2, 6 through 8. Thus says the Lord, for 3 transgressions of Israel, and for 4 I will not revoke the punishment. Because they sell the righteous for silver and the needy for a pair of sandals, they who trample the head of the poor into the dust of the earth and push the afflicted out of the way. Father and son go into the same girl, so that my holy name is profaned. They lay themselves down beside every altar on garments taken in pledge, and in the house of their God they drink wine bought with fines they imposed. Okay, so see here, we get a number of pretty vivid images. They sell the righteous for silver, okay? And you also get this kind of litany that has a pretty profound emotional impact, right? It's sort of building up this image of social concern, social and religious concern. That should be, I think its effect is to be pretty distressing, right? So this oracle This poem is a judgment against Israel. You can see here are two intertwining themes shared by many of the prophetic books. The first is social justice. Here in Amos, it is a ringing cry. Because they sell the righteous for silver and the needy for a pair of sandals. This text presses us to ask, what is more important to us? Justice for the righteous, care for the needy, or money, consumer goods? This should feel like a profoundly relevant issue for us today. We who are the richest nation, the highest consumers of luxury goods in the world. Where does our money come from? And the slavery audit rightly asks this question, which you'll be reading this week as well. Where does our endowment come from? Okay? And where do our sandals, our clothing, our goods, our food come from? Who is producing them and under what circumstances? We are usually happy not to know the answer to these questions, but our ignorance does not make us innocent. Unjust labor practices continue. They did in the 8th century world, and they do today. They lay themselves down beside every altar on garments taken in pledge. A pledge is a token given in promise. It's essentially collateral for a loan. The wealthy here enriching themselves through predatory lending practices. Does this sound familiar too? We should be haunted by this text. We would be right to remember the Great Recession of 2008 was a crisis triggered by predatory lending practices, bad mortgages that targeted the most vulnerable. These are issues of social justice, which is central to the prophetic concern. This, of course, though, is never divorced from the second central concern of the prophets, which is right worship. You see here the two issues are inextricably intertwined. My holy name is profaned. They lay themselves down beside every altar. And in the house of God or the temple of God, they drink wine bought with fines they imposed. The right worship of God, the prophets argue, is always linked to justice. We cannot worship God rightly. We cannot approach the altar or enter the house of God in worship while we remain oblivious to our own power and our own exploitative practices. Social justice and right worship are always intertwined.